A Hell's Angel heard a 1-year-old baby cry through a violent storm. He gave away his jacket to save the child. The wind hit the clubhouse windows like fists. Mason Cole stood near the old television bolted above the bar, arms crossed, watching the weather map turn an angry shade of red across the screen. The woman on the news was talking fast, the way people talk when they are trying not to sound scared. A state of emergency has been declared for Briar Glen and surrounding counties. Residents are urged to stay off the roads. Flash flooding is expected along low-lying areas, including Miller Creek and Route 9. Behind him, chairs scraped across the concrete floor. Tiny Duval and Sanchez were dragging the pool table away from the big front window, and Roy Dawson stood at the door, watching the sky turn the color of a bruise. "Storm's gonna be a bad one," Roy said. He didn't need the television to tell him that. 40 years of Missouri weather had taught him to read the clouds himself. Mason didn't answer right away. He was thinking about Earl. "I gotta run something out to Bennett's place," he finally said. Roy turned from the door. "Tonight?" "His oxygen machine eats through that medicine fast. He's got maybe half a day's supply left, if that. I told him I'd bring more by tomorrow, but tomorrow might be too late if this storm knocks his power out. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today." Now, back to the story. "Mason, it's already coming down sideways. You heard the woman. Roads are gonna flood." "I know the roads." Mason walked toward the counter, where a small paper bag sat next to his keys. Inside was the inhaler solution and 2 bottles of pills, wrapped twice in plastic by the pharmacist who knew Earl well enough to guess a storm might come between the prescription and the old man's next visit. "I'll take the high road, the one that runs along the ridge. It'll add 20 minutes, but it stays dry." Roy studied him for a long moment. He'd known Mason for almost 15 years, long enough to understand that arguing rarely worked once Mason had made up his mind about something like this. "You call me the second you get there, and the second you leave." "I will." Mason picked up the bag, tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket, and walked out toward his motorcycle parked beneath the covered awning at the side of the building. Thunder rolled somewhere far off, low and steady, like something enormous turning over in its sleep. He checked the straps on his saddlebags first, out of habit more than necessity. Tools rode in the left bag, always in the same order: wrench, pliers, a coil of wire, a roll of tape. He'd learned long ago that a broken-down bike in the middle of nowhere was no different than a broken-down man. Both needed somebody who came prepared. Before he swung his leg over the seat, he paused and reached inside his jacket, past the pocket where the medicine sat, to the small pin sewn into the lining near his heart. He didn't need to look at it. His fingers knew its shape by touch alone, the tiny curve of the letters spelling out a name that still caught in his throat after 20 years. Noah. He held it there a moment, the way he always did before riding into anything that scared him even a little. Then he let his hand fall away and pulled his gloves on. Roy appeared in the doorway again, arms folded against the wind. "Mason." Mason looked back. "Be careful out there. That's an order, not a request." Mason almost smiled. "Since when do I take orders?" "Since I said so." Roy's voice softened. "Earl would want you safe more than he'd want that medicine on time. Earl doesn't get a vote tonight." Mason swung onto the bike and started the engine. It roared to life beneath him, familiar and steady, drowning out the first heavy drops of rain beginning to strike the tin roof above. He pulled out from under the awning and onto the gravel drive, the clubhouse lights shrinking behind him in his mirrors. Above the tree line, lightning cracked white and silver, illuminating the churning clouds for half a second before the darkness swallowed everything again. The rain came harder as he reached the county road. the kind of rain that made the world outside his headlight disappear into a gray wall. Mason leaned forward, gripped the handlebars, and rode on toward Earl Bennett's isolated house, the storm growing wilder with every mile. Earl's medicine was safe and dry inside the old man's house, and Mason had watched with his own eyes as Earl hooked up the machine and breathed easier within minutes. That part of the night had gone right. But now, only a few miles down the road, the storm seemed to be getting worse instead of better, like it had been waiting for him to relax his guard. The wind hit the bike broadside, and Mason felt the back tire slide before he corrected it, boots pressing hard against the pegs. Rain came at him sideways, not falling so much as flying, stinging his face even behind the visor of his helmet. He slowed the bike to a crawl, squinting through the gray wall of water in front of him. Up ahead, his headlight caught the shape of the old bus shelter that had stood along this stretch of highway for as long as Mason could remember. Half of it looked wrong now, collapsed inward like a tin can someone had stepped on. Branches and torn pieces of roofing littered the road in front of it, and beyond the debris, the pavement seemed to vanish into darkness. Mason eased the bike to a stop and put his boots down, steadying himself against a fresh gust. He was not going to ride through that mess blind. He sat there a moment, engine idling roughly beneath him, trying to figure the safest way around. Lightning cracked overhead, and for one bright second the whole scene lit up white. Mason's eyes caught something on the shoulder of the road he almost missed. Tire marks, fresh ones, cutting hard off the pavement and disappearing over the edge where the ditch should have been. But there was no ditch to see now, only black water, rushing and churning like something alive. His stomach dropped. Mason cut the engine. The silence that followed was not really silence at all. Rain hammered against his helmet, thunder rumbled somewhere close, and wind screamed through the broken shelter. But underneath all of it, Mason held perfectly still, straining to hear past the storm. At first he thought it was nothing. Some trick of the wind through the broken boards, or maybe an animal caught in the wreckage, a rabbit or a raccoon crying out in pain. He almost talked himself into riding on, telling himself the storm was playing games with his ears. Then the wind dropped for half a second, like the storm itself was pausing to take a breath. And in that half second, Mason heard it clearly. A baby. Crying. His blood went cold. He didn't think after that. He swung off the bike so fast he nearly lost his footing on the slick pavement, boots skidding before he caught himself. He yanked open the left saddlebag, fingers working fast and sure despite the shaking in his hands, and pulled out his heavy flashlight and a coil of rope he kept for emergencies just like this one, though he had never imagined an emergency like this. He left the bike right where it was on the shoulder, headlight still pointed uselessly into the rain, and moved toward the edge where the tire marks disappeared. The embankment was steep and slick with mud, and Mason half slid, half climbed his way down it, one hand gripping exposed roots and rocks, the other holding the flashlight steady in front of him. The beam cut through the rain and landed on the wreck below. A car, crumpled and half swallowed by the collapsed shelter, sat wedged at an angle in the rising water. Its back window was shattered, and Mason could see dark water already pouring in through the broken glass, filling the cabin inch by inch. A few feet from the car, tangled in broken boards and debris, sat a small car seat, thrown clear in the crash. Inside it, a tiny girl fought against her restraints, her cries thin and desperate against the roar of the storm. Near the driver's door, half submerged in the churning water, a young woman lay motionless, her head tipped back, dark hair floating around her face. Mason's heart slammed against his ribs. The car groaned, shifting slightly as the water pushed against it, threatening to break free and carry everything downstream into the swollen creek. "Hello?" Mason shouted, his voice swallowed almost instantly by the wind. "Can anybody hear me?" Nothing answered but the storm and the baby's cries. Mason didn't wait for a second chance. He dropped to his knees in the mud and crawled beneath the broken boards of the collapsed shelter toward the crying child, ignoring the way the whole structure creaked and swayed above him with every gust of wind. The boards above him groaned again, but Mason kept moving, elbows in the mud, until his hand finally closed around the plastic edge of the car seat. He pulled himself the last few feet and got his first clear look at her. She could not have been more than a year old. Her lips had gone a pale shade of blue, and her small body shook with cold. But she was crying, which meant she was breathing, which meant there was still time. "Hey there," Mason said, keeping his voice low and steady, the same voice he used to calm spooked horses at Earl's place years ago. "Hey, sweetheart, I got you. I got you now." He set the flashlight down in the mud, angling it so the beam still lit the space around them, and went to work on the straps. His fingers were thick and scarred, not built for delicate buckles, and the cold had made them clumsy, but he forced them to move anyway. The chest clip came free first, then the strap at her waist. He checked her arms, her legs, running his hands gently along her small body the way he had been taught once, a long time ago, back when he still let himself imagine holding a child of his own. No blood, no obvious breaks, just cold, just scared. The moment her arms came loose, she reached for him. Small fists grabbed hold of his soaked shirt, gripping the fabric with a strength that surprised him. Mason felt something crack open in his chest, something he had kept locked down tight for 20 years. "I got you," he said again. "I ain't letting go." The car shifted behind him, metal groaning against metal, and Mason felt the whole shelter tremble. Water surged past his knees, colder and faster than before, dragging bits of debris with it. He had maybe minutes, maybe less. There was no time to think about what came next. Mason unzipped his jacket with one hand, while the other kept the baby pressed close against him. The heavy leather peeled away from his shoulders like a second skin coming off. 20 years of road dust and rain, and every mile he'd ever ridden folded into that leather. The patch on the back, the colors that told the world who he rode with. The small silver pin sewn into the inside pocket, the one with Noah's name and 2 dates only 4 months apart. He gave none of it a single thought. He wrapped the jacket around the baby, folding it over and over until she disappeared inside it completely, nothing showing but the top of her wet head. He tucked her against his bare chest, inside his shirt as best he could, skin against skin, the oldest trick there was for warming something too cold to warm itself. "Stay with me now," he murmured against her ear. "Stay right here." Her crying softened, not stopping, but quieting, like she understood him somehow. Mason turned towards the car and saw the young woman still slumped against the driver's door, water lapping at her shoulders now. He splashed toward her, one arm cradling the baby tight, the other reaching out to find her wrist. A pulse. Weak, but there. A gash near her temple wept blood into the water, and when he touched her face gently, she did not stir. "Ma'am," he said, louder this time. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Nothing. Mason's mind raced. He could not carry them both through rising water and up a slick embankment, not safely, not without risking a fall that could kill them all. He looked around, flashlight sweeping the wreckage, until it landed on a broad piece of metal roofing torn loose from the collapsed shelter, half buried in mud a few feet away. He tugged it free, muscles straining, and dragged it close. From his motorcycle, he'd already grabbed the folded blanket he kept for engine trouble on cold nights, and he spread it flat across the metal, padding it as best he could. Working fast, he pulled the young woman free of the car and laid her across the makeshift sled, securing her with the cargo ties from his saddlebags, cinching them tight across her chest and legs. Then he began to pull. The rope from his saddlebags was not enough. Mason knelt in the mud and stripped the leather straps from his tool bag, working them into a makeshift sling he could tie across his chest and shoulders. He settled Lily into it, facing him, her small head tucked beneath his chin, his jacket still wrapped around her like a cocoon. He tested the knots twice before he trusted them. "Okay," he said, mostly to himself. "Okay, we're moving." He checked the ties holding Emma to the metal sled one more time, made sure her head was angled to keep water from pooling near her mouth, and then he took hold of the rope and began to pull. The farm road, if it could still be called that, had not seen a tractor in years. Weeds and saplings had grown up through the gravel, and the storm had turned what remained into a soup of mud that sucked at his boots with every step. The sled dragged heavy behind him, catching on ruts, sliding sideways when the ground tilted. Mason leaned into the rope like a man pulling a plow, his shoulders burning, his boots slipping more than once and sending jolts of panic through him each time he felt himself start to go down. He did not stop talking. "You still with me down there?" he said, feeling Lily's small body shift against his chest. Her cries had thinned out, no longer the strong, angry wail from the wreckage, but something smaller, softer, worse. "Come on now. I need you to holler at me. Can't have you going quiet on me." She whimpered. A thin sound, but a sound. "There she is," Mason said, and something in his own voice cracked with relief. "That's my girl. Your mama's right behind us, you hear? She's tough. Tougher than me, probably. She's gonna wake up and give me an earful for taking so long. Just you wait." He kept talking because the words gave him something to hold on to besides the rope. He told Lily about nothing in particular, about the sound rain made on a motorcycle helmet, about a dog he used to have that hated thunder worse than any human he'd ever met. Anything to keep his voice steady and low and constant in her ear. Every few minutes he glanced back at Emma, checking the rise and fall of her chest in the flashlight beam, and every few minutes it was still there, shallow, but present. The farmhouse appeared first as a shape against the sky, a darker block rising out of the flat gray sheets of rain. As he got closer, lightning gave him a clearer look. Stone foundation, sagging porch, a roofline that had survived more storms than this one. It sat on a rise of ground just high enough that the water pooling around its base hadn't yet reached the front steps. Nearly 20 minutes after leaving the wreck, Mason's legs gave out on the last stretch of ground, and he half fell, half stumbled up onto the porch, still gripping the rope, still pulling Emma up behind him. He shouldered the door open. The beam of his flashlight swept across a dust-covered room, and a woman's voice cried out in alarm from the corner. "Who's there? Don't you come near me!" An older woman stood pressed against the far wall, a rolling pin gripped in both hands like a weapon, her white hair plastered to her head from rain that had gotten in through a broken window. Her eyes went straight to Mason's bloodied hands, then to the patch on the back of the jacket wrapped around Lily, and her face hardened with fear. "I'm not here to hurt anybody," Mason said, holding perfectly still, hands open. "Got a baby and her mama both hurt. Please, I need help." The woman's eyes dropped to the small shape bundled against his chest, then to the young woman strapped unmoving to the metal sled behind him. Something in her expression shifted, fear giving way to something more urgent. Bring her closer to the light, she said, already moving. My name's Evelyn. I taught school for 30 years and I know some first aid. Let me look at her. Mason laid Lily down near the cold fireplace, still wrapped tight in his jacket, and forced himself to stand up straight. His shoulders screamed at him. His hands were worse, cut up from the twisted metal at the wreck, mud packed into the wounds. He didn't look at them too closely. There wasn't time. Shed out back, Evelyn said, already peeling Emma's soaked jacket away from her arms. Saw a generator in there when I came up the drive, if it's still any good. Has to be, Mason said, and went back out into the rain. The shed roof had more holes than shingles, and water poured through in ropes, splattering against a generator that looked like it hadn't run since Emma was in diapers herself. Mason crouched beside it, flashlight clenched between his teeth, and popped the fuel line loose. It came apart in his hand, the rubber gone brittle and cracked clean through. The tank underneath sloshed with fuel that had turned dark and thick with age. He almost laughed. Almost. Course it is, he muttered around the flashlight. He went to work. His saddlebags held what a lot of men would call junk, the leavings of 20 years of roadside repairs. But every scrap of tubing and wire and hose clamp had a use if a man knew how to look at it right. He cut a length of fuel line down to size with his pocket knife, his fingers slick with blood and rain, and every twist of the blade sent a fresh sting through the cuts on his palm. He didn't stop. The connections were worse. Corrosion had eaten through the fittings, green and crusted, and he had to scrape them clean with the edge of his knife before the new tubing would seat right. He wound wire around each joint, twisted it tight with a pair of pliers, and prayed the old engine still had enough life in it to turn over once he had fuel getting to it clean. He was elbow deep in the housing when Evelyn's voice carried out through the open shed door. Wood's too wet. It won't catch. I've tried 3 times. Mason wiped his hands on his jeans, wincing, and jogged back to the house. Evelyn had a small pile of kindling arranged in the hearth, blackened at the edges from her attempts, but nothing more than smoke curling up out of it. Move back, he said. He pulled the box of matches from his shirt pocket, down to his last 3, the cardboard soft with damp. He struck one against the strip, cupping the flame with his hand until it caught properly, then reached into his jacket pocket for the small tin flask he kept fuel in for emergencies just like this. A few careful drops onto the kindling. He touched the match to it and stepped back as the fire leapt up, hungry and orange, catching the drier wood underneath before it could die. There, he said. Keep feeding it slow. I've got to get back to that generator. Evelyn nodded, already reaching for another piece of wood, and Mason disappeared back into the storm. It took another 20 minutes of coaxing, of priming the new line by hand, and clearing air pockets that kept the engine from turning over, before the old machine finally sputtered, coughed, and caught. The sound of it running was the sweetest thing Mason had heard all night. He rigged a line from the generator into the house, got a portable heater going in the front room, and switched on 2 lamps that flickered weakly before settling into a steady glow. An old radio sitting on a shelf crackled to life when he found its cord, static hissing through the speaker. Inside, the change was immediate. Lily's small, trembling body, still wrapped in Mason's jacket by the fire, began to still. Her breathing evened out, no longer coming in those thin, shallow gasps. Then Emma stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, glassy and unfocused, and the first thing she saw was a big, bearded stranger leaning over her daughter near the fire. "No!" she gasped, struggling against the blankets, reaching out with a shaking arm. "Give her back! That's my baby!" Mason stepped back at once, hands raised, and Evelyn moved quickly to lift Lily into Emma's arms. "You're safe," Mason said, low and calm. "Your car went into the ditch. I found you both. This is Evelyn. She's been taking care of you." Emma clutched Lily against her chest, breathing hard, her eyes darting between the fire, the stranger, and the tiny bundle in her arms. Slowly, the panic began to drain from her face. Then her gaze dropped to the jacket wrapped around her daughter, and she went still. Emma's fingers moved over the worn leather like she was reading Braille, tracing the stitched patch on the sleeve. Her breathing had changed. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something harder. "Who are you?" she said. Not a question. A demand. "Mason Cole." "That patch." She looked up at him, and her eyes had gone sharp, clear despite the blood still crusted near her temple. "I've seen it before, in a photograph. Did you know Daniel Harper?" The fire popped behind her. Evelyn went still by the hearth, sensing the air in the room had changed. Mason didn't look away. "Hawk was my best friend. 20-some years." Something broke loose in Emma's face. For a moment, gratitude flickered there. The same gratitude that had softened her eyes when she first understood this stranger had pulled her and her daughter out of the flood. Then it curdled into something else, something that had clearly been sitting in her chest a long time, waiting for a place to land. "Best friend?" She said the words like they tasted bad. "My father was hurt. He had bills he couldn't pay. He needed the people who called themselves his brothers, and not one of you came." Her voice cracked, rising. "He told me, before he died, he told me never to trust a man wearing that patch. He said you all turned your backs on him when he needed you most." Lily stirred in her arms, startled by the sharpness in her mother's voice, and Emma pulled her closer without softening her tone. "So don't stand there and tell me you were his friend." Mason took the accusation the way a man takes a blow he's expecting. He didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice, didn't reach for an excuse. He simply stood with his cut hands hanging at his sides and let her finish. "You believe that," he said quietly. "I understand why. He wanted you to." "Don't." Emma's voice shook. "Don't tell me what my own father wanted." "I'm not telling you what he wanted for himself," Mason said. "I'm telling you what he wanted for you." He crouched down slow, so he wasn't looming over her, careful the way a man is careful around something wounded. "Hawk didn't get left behind, Emma. He left, on purpose, and he made sure it looked like our fault, because the truth was more dangerous than the lie." Emma's jaw tightened. "That's not what happened." "There was a man," Mason said. "Silas Mercer. Loaned money to folks who didn't have anywhere else to turn. Your father borrowed from him to pay for your mama's cancer treatments, back when the club couldn't cover it fast enough and the hospital was threatening to stop care. When Hawk couldn't pay Mercer back on his timetable, Mercer started making threats. Not against your dad. Against you. You were maybe 4 years old." Evelyn's hand had gone still on the log she'd been about to feed the fire. "The club wanted to handle it," Mason went on. "We offered him money. Offered to go have a conversation with Mercer that would have ended the problem quick. Your dad said no. He said if we came down on Mercer with our patches showing, it wouldn't end the threat. It'd multiply it. Man like that doesn't forget an insult. He remembers it against a little girl for the rest of her life." "So what did he do?" Emma said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. "He left the club. Loud. Public. Told anybody who'd listen that his brothers left him to drown. Told you the same thing, so you'd believe it down in your bones, because a scared kid can slip and say the wrong thing to the wrong person. He needed Mercer to believe you had no connection to any of us, no protection worth going after. He gave up his name with us to buy you a life without a target on it." Emma stared at him, unable to speak, her arms tightening instinctively around Lily. Mason reached into his jacket, the one still hanging half off her daughter's shoulders, and worked 2 fingers into an inside pocket sewn along the lining. He drew out a small photograph, its edges soft with age but the surface still clear, sealed years ago in plastic against exactly this kind of weather. He held it out to her. It showed Daniel Harper, younger, laughing, a toddler Emma balanced on his hip, standing beside Mason's motorcycle in front of the old clubhouse. "Turn it over," Mason said. Emma's hands trembled as she turned the photograph over. The handwriting was faded but legible, her father's careful block letters pressed into the plastic sleeve, like he'd wanted them to last forever. "If she ever needs you, do what I was too proud to ask." She read it twice, 3 times. Her lips moved without sound. "That's his handwriting," she whispered. "I'd know it anywhere." "He wrote that the week before he left the club," Mason said. "Gave it to me himself. Told me if the day ever came, I'd know what to do." Emma looked up, and there was something raw and unsteady in her face now, the anger draining out and leaving something more frightened behind it. "What did you do?" Mason rubbed a hand over his jaw, the stubble rasping under his palm. He seemed to be deciding how much to say, then seemed to decide it didn't matter anymore. The storm outside had already torn away every other secret tonight. "After he died," Mason said, "we started sending things. Never with our names on it. Grocery cards, mostly. Some months it was your heating bill, paid straight to the company so you'd never see who from. When you got into that nursing assistant program, there was a scholarship fund that came through the community college. Anonymous donor." He paused. "That was us. Me and Earl and a few of the others. We split it so no one man's name ever showed up twice on anything." Emma's mouth had gone slack. "That scholarship, I thought that was a church fund. We made sure it looked that way. Why would you—" She stopped, shook her head like she was trying to knock the words into some order that made sense. "Why hide it? Why not just tell me?" "Because your father made me promise," Mason said, and for the first time, his voice cracked just slightly, just enough that Evelyn glanced over from the fire. "He said if you ever found out help was coming from the club, you'd throw it back in our faces. He said you'd rather go hungry than owe anything to the people you thought left him to die alone. He wasn't wrong to worry about it. Look at you right now." Emma's eyes had filled, and she blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall in front of a stranger, even one who apparently wasn't a stranger at all. Her mind was racing backward through years she'd thought she understood. The winter the heating company had called to say her account was paid in full, and she'd never questioned it, too relieved to ask. The Christmas when a grocery card arrived in a plain envelope with no return address, 3 weeks after she'd skipped her own dinner twice so Lily could eat. The scholarship letter that came exactly when she'd been ready to drop out and take a second job instead. All of it. Every single time she and Lily had stood at the very edge of losing everything, something had arrived to catch them. "It was you," she said. Not a question this time either. Just the truth, finally landing. "Wasn't only me," Mason said quietly. "But yeah, some of it was me." Emma opened her mouth, some jumble of gratitude and disbelief and old anger all fighting to come out at once. But before a single word could form, Lily shifted in her arms. It wasn't the normal, restless movement of a sleepy child. It was wrong, a sudden looseness, like something inside her had simply let go. "Lily?" Emma's voice sharpened instantly, all other thoughts gone. She pulled the baby back to look at her face, and what she saw made her heart stop. Lily's lips had gone a dusky blue-gray, the color draining from around her mouth like ink bleeding backward out of paper. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, fluttering breaths, too fast and too weak. No, 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 no. Emma's hands shook as she pressed 2 fingers to Lily's tiny wrist, searching for a pulse. She has a heart condition. She was born with it. She needs her medication. It's in the diaper bag. It's in the... Her voice broke entirely. The car. It's all in the car. Evelyn was already moving, dropping to her knees beside them. The radio, she said sharply to Mason. Check the radio, now. Mason snapped it on, static crackling through the room, and a broken voice came through in fragments. Miller Creek Bridge, washed out. Ground crews cannot reach before dawn. The generator hummed weakly in the corner, its fuel gauge already low. Outside, water pressed closer against the foundation with every passing minute. Give her to me, Mason said, his voice suddenly steady in a way that cut through the panic. He held out his arms. Keep her upright, Emma said, hands shaking as she guided Lily into his grip. Against your chest, high, like this. Don't let her lie flat. Mason took the baby's weight against him, feeling how impossibly light and how impossibly fragile she'd become in the space of a few seconds. Lily's small hand curled weakly against his shirt. All 3 of them understood, in the same silent instant, that surviving the crash had only been the beginning. Emma's fingers found Lily's wrist again, counting silently, her lips moving with the numbers. Her training took over even as her heart pounded against her ribs like a fist against a door. Pulse is fast. Too fast, she said. But it's there. Keep her upright, Mason, just like that. I've got her, Mason said. His voice came out low and even, though his own pulse was hammering just as hard. He shifted Lily so her cheek rested against his collarbone, her small body curled into the space beneath his chin. You're all right, sweet girl. You're all right. Evelyn had already pulled a stub of pencil and an old receipt from her coat pocket, smoothing it flat against her knee. Tell me everything you can, she said to Emma. Every symptom, in order. I'll write it down so we don't lose track of what's changing. Emma nodded, grateful for something concrete to hold on to. Her lips went blue. Her breathing was fast, then it got shallow. She went limp before that. Her fingers were cold before her face was. Evelyn wrote quickly, her handwriting small and neat despite the shaking lamplight. And this heart condition, what exactly is it? It's a defect, Emma said. Something with the valves. The doctors explained it a dozen times and I still don't always get the words right. It means her heart doesn't push blood the way it should. When she's cold or sick or stressed, her body can't keep up. That's why the storm. Why all of this... She stopped, pressing a hand to her mouth for a moment before forcing herself to keep going. There's medicine. A card in the diaper bag lists it all out. The name, the dosage, what she can and can't have. I've read that card so many times I thought I'd never forget it, but I can't... Her voice cracked. I can't remember the name right now. I can't remember the numbers. That's normal, Evelyn said gently, not looking up from her writing. Fear steals words. It'll come back to you. It has to come back before it matters, Emma whispered. Mason kept his eyes on Lily's face, watching the faint flutter of her eyelashes, the small hitch of her chest. He remembered, without wanting to, the sound of monitors in a hospital room 20 years ago, steady, and then suddenly not. He pushed the memory down and made his own breathing slow and deep, exaggerated, so Lily could feel it against her cheek. Breathe with me, he murmured, more to her than to anyone else in the room. In, out, nice and slow. You don't have to hurry, baby girl. Nobody's rushing you. He wasn't sure a 1-year-old could understand rhythm, but something in his low, steady voice seemed to reach her. Her breathing hitched again, then evened out just slightly. Not fixed, not safe, but steadier than it had been a minute before. The radio crackled on the table, and all three of them turned toward it like it might hold the answer to everything. County Emergency Services report the Miller Creek Bridge remains impassable. Ground crews unable to reach isolated residences at this time. If wind conditions ease before sunrise, helicopter rescue may be attempted for critical cases. The voice dissolved into static before it could say anything more. Mason's jaw tightened. "Sunrise?" Emma said hollowly. "That's hours." Mason set his mind to work, the way he did with a broken engine, looking for the piece that could be fixed instead of the ones that couldn't. He remembered a folded map he'd seen tucked in a drawer of the front hallway earlier, curled with age, the kind of thing an old farmhouse held onto for decades. He crossed the room and found it again, unfolding it carefully on the table beside Evelyn's notes. "Ranger Station," he said, tracing a finger along a faded line. 6 miles out. If I took the bike... The roads are underwater in 2 places between here and there," Emma cut in, sharp with fear. "You said so yourself. If you leave and don't make it, that's not 1 emergency anymore. That's 2. Evelyn set down her pencil. "Before you decide anything foolish, Mason Cole, you ought to check the barns and the equipment shed. The Kettner family who used to own this place, the husband volunteered with the fire department for 30 years. A man like that doesn't let his tools rot when he moves on. There may be something here already that solves your problem better than a 6-mile ride through floodwater." Mason looked at her, then at Emma, then down at Lily's small, weak face against his chest. "All right," he said. "I'll look. But I'm not going anywhere without telling you first, Emma. Not tonight. Not ever." The barn door hung crooked on one hinge, and Mason had to lift it slightly to swing it open without it dragging through the mud. Inside, the air smelled of old hay and motor oil, familiar smells that steadied him more than he expected. "Over here," Evelyn said, her flashlight beam catching a metal cabinet bolted to the far wall. A padlock hung from the latch, rusted but not broken. Mason found a tire iron leaning against a workbench and pried the lock loose with 2 hard pulls. The cabinet door creaked open. Inside were the tools of a man who had once taken emergencies seriously. Folded emergency blankets, silver and crinkled, sat stacked beside a manual resuscitation mask still sealed in its plastic pouch. A coil of climbing rope hung from a hook, thick and sturdy despite years of neglect. Bottles of expired antiseptic and bandages gone brittle with age filled the bottom shelf, mostly useless now. But near the back, wrapped in a canvas bag, Mason found what he was hoping for. A portable radio antenna, the kind volunteer fire crews use to boost weak signals in low areas. "This might be it," he said, pulling it free and turning it over in his hands. "If I can get this above the roofline, it might carry us past whatever's blocking the signal down here." Evelyn studied the darkening sky through the barn's open door. Wind was picking up again, bending the tops of the trees at the edge of the property. "The wind's getting worse, not better." "I know." Mason slung the antenna's strap over his shoulder. "But Lily doesn't have until the wind decides to behave." They carried the emergency blankets and the resuscitation mask back to the house first, along with the rope, which Mason looped over his forearm, without explanation. Evelyn understood without being told. If he was going up on the roof, he'd want something to anchor himself with. At the farmhouse, they found the ladder Mason had used earlier for the first antenna attempt, still propped against the porch. Evelyn gripped its base with both hands, planting her feet wide in the mud. "I'm too old to be much of a counterweight," she said, "but I'm not letting go either." Mason began to climb, the antenna bag bouncing against his hip, the rope's rough fibers scraping his palm. Above him, a window scraped open, and Emma's face appeared, pale in the lamplight from inside. "She's the same," Emma called down, her voice raised over the wind. "Breathing still fast, but no worse. I'm watching her every second, Mason." "Keep watching," he called back. "I'm almost there." The roof was slick, the shingles slippery with rain, and Mason moved carefully, testing each foothold before trusting his weight to it. He found the spot where he'd rigged the first antenna and began working the new one into place, his fingers numb, his shoulder already aching from hours of strain. Below, Evelyn kept both hands locked on the ladder, her face turned upward, watching him with an intensity that made her look younger than 68. Mason clicked the antenna into its final connection and shouted down toward the window. "Try it now!" A pause. Then Emma's voice, tight with hope. "Static's clearing. Mason, I think it's working." He half slid, half climbed back toward the radio unit mounted near the chimney, adjusting the dial with cold fingers until a voice broke through, clearer than before. "This is County Emergency Dispatch. Please repeat your location." Mason gave the address as best he could recall from the mailbox at the end of the drive, then said the words that mattered most. "We have a 1-year-old female in cardiac distress, congenital heart condition. We need medical guidance and evacuation as soon as the roads allow." The dispatcher's voice crackled back, recording the details, promising to relay them to the nearest rescue unit. That was when the lightning struck. It split a tree not 30 feet from the house with a crack so loud it swallowed every other sound. The flash lit the yard white for half a second, and Mason, startled, lost his footing on the wet shingles. He grabbed for the chimney, missed, and slid hard, his shoulder slamming into the porch roof's edge before the rope Evelyn had tied off caught him and stopped his fall. "Mason!" Emma screamed from the window. "I'm alive!" he gritted out, though his shoulder screamed with a pain that stole his breath. "Give me a second." Evelyn was already climbing partway up the ladder, ignoring her own warning about her age, reaching for his arm to help guide him down the last few feet. Emma met them at the porch, her hands shaking as she helped ease Mason through the door. "Your shoulder," Emma said, seeing the way he favored it. "Let me look." "It's fine," Mason said, though sweat had broken across his forehead despite the cold. "Lily, how's Lily?" "She's stable," Emma said. "But you're not?" "I'm fine," he repeated, forcing the words even and calm, the same way he'd forced his breathing steady for Lily earlier. "The dispatcher heard us. That's what matters." Evelyn's eyes lingered on him a moment too long, seeing straight through the calm to the pain beneath it. But she said nothing, only reached for the emergency blankets they'd carried in from the barn. Evelyn tore strips from an old pillowcase she'd found in a hallway closet, her hands quick and sure despite their trembling. "This is going to hurt," she warned Mason, "but I need to keep that shoulder from moving." "Do it!" Mason said through clenched teeth. She worked with a gentleness that belied her firm instructions, wrapping the cloth strips around his shoulder and across his chest, binding his arm close to his body. Years of teaching young children had given her steady hands, and years of nursing a sick husband had taught her how to keep pain from showing on her own face while she caused it in someone else. "There," she said finally, tying off the last strip. "It's not a proper sling, but it'll hold until real help arrives." Mason nodded, sweat still beaded on his forehead, and turned his attention back to where Emma sat near the fire with Lily. The baby had improved enough that her cries had settled into soft, hiccuping breaths, but she still needed watching. Emma had been checking her temperature every few minutes, pressing the back of her hand against Lily's cheek, counting her breaths against the ticking of an old clock on the mantel. She needs a dry blanket, Emma said, reaching for one of the silver emergency blankets Mason and Evelyn had brought from the barn. The jacket's soaked through on the outside. I want to switch her before she gets a chill again. She lifted Lily carefully, unwrapping the heavy leather jacket that had kept the baby warm since the moment Mason pulled her from the wreckage. As she peeled back the collar to free Lily's arms, something caught the firelight, a small metal shape stitched into the inner lining near the collar. Emma paused, her fingers brushing over it. It was a memorial pin, the kind people wore to remember someone they had lost. Engraved into its surface were 2 words and 2 dates. Noah Cole. The dates beneath the name were close together. Too close. A person could count the months on one hand. Emma looked up at Mason, who stood near the window, his bound arm held stiff against his side. He hadn't moved, but something in his face had changed, a tightening around his eyes that hadn't been there a moment before. Mason, she said quietly. Who was Noah? He didn't answer right away. He turned toward the fire instead, watching the flames as though they might give him the words, or maybe take the question away entirely. It doesn't matter, he said finally. Not right now. Lily needs the blanket. Emma finished wrapping Lily in the fresh blanket, but she didn't let the subject go. She held Lily against her shoulder, patting her back gently, waiting. Mason? She tried again, softer this time. I saw the pin. 4 months isn't very long. Mason's jaw worked, and for a moment Emma thought he might walk out onto the porch rather than answer her. Evelyn, folding the wet jacket over a chair to dry, said nothing, but her eyes moved between the 2 of them with quiet understanding. Then Lily, still fussy from the cold and the fright of the night, reached out one small hand and found Mason's finger where it hung at his side. Her fingers curled around his, tiny and warm, and held on the way she'd held onto his shirt earlier that night. Mason looked down at her hand wrapped around his own, and something in his shoulders loosened, not from the pain of his injury, but from something older, something he'd carried much longer. Noah was my son, he said. The words came out rough, like they'd been sitting behind his teeth for 20 years, waiting for someone to finally pull them loose. Emma stayed quiet, letting him find his way to the rest of it. He was 4 months old when he died, Mason continued, his eyes still on Lily's small hand around his finger. Him and his mother, Claire, both, 20 years ago now. He drew in a breath that shook despite his effort to keep it steady. There was a man driving home from a party, drunk, crossed the center line on a road he'd probably driven sober 1,000 times before that night. Emma's hand stilled on Lily's back. Claire was bringing Noah home from a doctor's appointment, Mason said. Nothing serious, just a checkup. He shook his head slowly. I got the call and I drove faster than I should have, and it still wasn't fast enough. By the time I reached the hospital, they were both already gone. The fire popped, sending a small shower of sparks up the chimney. But no one in the room moved. I spent a long time believing I'd failed them, Mason said. That if I'd been there, if I'd left work sooner, if I'd taken a different road myself that day to meet them, something would have been different. He glanced at Evelyn's careful stitching along his shoulder, then back at Lily. The club showed up for me when almost nobody else did. Sat with me through the funeral, sat with me through the trial. When everyone else got tired of my grief and moved on with their lives, they didn't. Emma held Lily a little closer, watching Mason's face in the firelight. After that, Mason said, I told myself I wasn't meant to have a family of my own, that I was meant to look after other people's instead. Easier that way. Safer. Emma looked down at the pin still visible where the jacket lay draped over the chair. Then back at Lily, sleeping now against her shoulder, finally warm. "Mason," she said gently, "your son's pin was pressed right against her the whole time you carried her tonight. The same jacket that kept her alive." Her voice caught slightly. "The son you couldn't save helped save my daughter." Mason opened his mouth, though no words came right away, his throat working around whatever he meant to say. That was when headlights swept across the front windows, cutting through the rain and throwing long shadows across the farmhouse walls. Mason moved to the window, careful not to jostle his bound arm. Through the rain-streaked glass, he watched a tow truck grind its way up the muddy drive, its tires throwing up sheets of water, headlights cutting twin tunnels through the downpour. It rocked over a fallen branch, nearly stalled, then lurched forward until it stopped a few yards from the porch steps. "That's not the rescue crew," Mason said quietly. "Radio said no ground vehicle could cross the bridge." Evelyn came to stand beside him, her arms crossed against the chill. "Maybe they found another way around." "Maybe," Mason said, though his voice carried no belief in it. A man climbed out of the truck, pulling the collar of a bright yellow jacket up against the rain. Reflective letters across the back read, "County Contractor." He jogged up the steps and knocked hard on the door, 3 sharp raps. Mason opened it, his frame filling the doorway, his bound arm held stiff at his side. "Evening," the man said, offering a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Name's Wade Mercer. County sent me out to check for stranded folks. Heard there might be some people needing a ride to higher ground." "Which office sent you?" Mason asked. Wade's smile didn't waver, but it didn't answer either. "Emergency management. Storm's got everybody working double shifts tonight." He peered past Mason into the farmhouse, his eyes moving quickly over Evelyn, over Emma sitting by the fire with Lily. "Looks like you folks have had quite a night." "We have," Mason said. He didn't step aside. "Mind if I come in? Awful wet out here." Mason hesitated, then moved back just enough to let Wade through, though he kept himself between the door and Emma's chair. Wade shook rain from his sleeves and looked around the room with the casual air of a man taking inventory. "Dispatch said there was a woman and a baby involved in a car accident nearby. That you, ma'am?" He looked toward Emma. "That's us," Emma said carefully, adjusting Lily against her shoulder. "Car went into the ditch off Route 9? Wade asked. "That's right." "Bad spot," Wade said, shaking his head. "Current's fierce through there this time of year, even without a storm like this one." He glanced toward Mason. "Bridge on 9 still standing? Or did it finally go?" "Emergency radio said it washed out hours ago," Mason said, watching Wade's face closely. Wade's expression flickered, just slightly, before smoothing over again. Right. That's what I heard too." He didn't explain how he'd managed to drive a truck up a flooded farm road if the main crossing was gone, and Mason noted the gap in his story the way he'd note a loose bolt on an engine, quietly filing it away. "You said you'd take us to higher ground," Emma said. "Is there room for all of us?" Sure, Wade said, though his attention had already drifted back to her. "Say, did you manage to grab anything out of your car before it went under? Any bags, anything like that?" "Just the diaper bag," Emma said. "It didn't survive the water, though." "Nothing else? No boxes, papers, anything from the trunk?" Emma frowned. "Why does that matter?" Wade shrugged, too quickly. "Just making sure we don't leave anything important behind. County likes a full report." Mason's jaw tightened. A man sent to save lives didn't ask about trunks before he asked about survivors. Wade's eyes drifted down to the small, laminated card clipped to the strap of Emma's bag, the one with her name printed across it in bold letters. Harper. Emma R. Something shifted in his face. Harper, he said slowly, testing the name like he was trying to place it. You wouldn't happen to be Daniel Harper's girl, would you? Emma went very still. That's my father. He passed a few years back. Small world, Wade said, though his smile had gone thin and careful. Say, did your daddy ever leave you anything? A metal box, maybe? Locked? Emma's breath caught. The old box. Her father's box. The one she'd packed into her trunk that very morning, meaning to carry it to the bank first thing tomorrow to lock it away somewhere safe at last. How do you know about that? She asked, her voice sharpening. Lucky guess, Wade said, though his eyes had sharpened too. What's your last name again? Emma asked slowly. Mercer, Wade said. Wade Mercer. Emma's hand tightened around Lily. Her father's voice rose up in her memory, low and afraid, warning her once, years ago, about a man named Silas Mercer, the lender who had come to their door demanding money they didn't have. Silas Mercer, Emma said. He was your father. Wade's smile finally dropped. He was, he admitted. But that's old business. Doesn't have anything to do with tonight. Behind him, unnoticed, Mason slipped quietly out onto the porch and moved toward the tow truck, rain soaking through his shirt as he worked his good hand beneath the hood. Inside, Wade leaned toward Emma, his voice dropping low and almost gentle. Tell you what, you tell me exactly where that box was stored in your trunk, and I'll take your baby somewhere warm and dry myself. Emma's arms tightened around Lily. Warm and dry? How? You don't even have a car seat in that truck. I'll figure something out, Wade said, waving a hand like the detail didn't matter. Point is, that box belongs to my family. Your daddy stole business records from my father. Ledgers, papers, things that don't concern anybody but us. He was trying to blackmail my father with them, if you want the truth of it. The screen door banged. Mason stepped back inside, rain dripping off his sleeves, his face unreadable. That's not the truth, Mason said. Wade turned. You don't know a thing about it. I know Daniel Harper, Mason said. Better than you ever will. He didn't steal records. He collected them. Loan papers with numbers changed after the fact. Property liens forged onto land that was never put up as collateral. Letters your father sent threatening families who couldn't pay what they never actually owed. Daniel kept every piece of it, because he knew someday somebody would need proof of what your family did to people who had nowhere else to turn. Wade's jaw worked. Lies. Then why do you want that box so bad you drove a truck up a washed-out road to get it? Mason asked quietly. Wade didn't answer. The silence said enough. Emma looked between them, her stomach twisting. The storm outside hadn't let up, and the truck sitting in the yard was still the only vehicle for miles that might carry them anywhere. But she had seen the flicker in Wade's eyes when he mentioned the box, the way his questions about Lily's safety had come only after his questions about her father's papers. I'm not telling you anything, Emma said, until somebody proves you're actually here to help us. Wade's smile vanished completely. He turned toward Mason, sizing him up the way a man might size up an obstacle rather than a person. You people are all the same. Big patch, big attitude, acting like you're protecting her. You're not protecting anybody. You're just using a scared girl and her sick kid so you can feel like a hero for one night. Watch your mouth, Mason said, low and even. Or what? Wade stepped closer, close enough that Mason could smell the cigarette smoke on his jacket. You gonna hit me? That'd look real good, wouldn't it? Biker beats up county contractor during a flood. Bet the deputies would love that story. He shoved Mason's chest with both hands. Mason's good fist came up, curled tight, 20 years of buried anger rising fast behind his eyes. For one long second the room went silent, except for the rain hammering the windows. Then Lily began to cry. The sound cut through Mason like nothing else could have. His fist opened, his arm dropped back to his side. He looked past Wade at Emma, who was rocking Lily against her shoulder, and something in his chest settled back into place. "The emergency dispatcher knows exactly who's inside this house," Mason said, his voice steady again. "Every name, every location. You so much as raise a hand to anybody here, that's the last free night you'll have for a long while." Wade's mouth twisted, but he took a step back. Evelyn moved from the fireplace to stand beside Mason, her thin frame squared up like she meant every word she was about to say. "I've lived 68 years, she said, "and I've learned the difference between a man who looks dangerous and a man who is dangerous. This one," she nodded toward Mason, "pulled a baby out of a flood and gave her the coat off his own back. You walked in here asking about paperwork before you asked if anybody needed a doctor. I know which one of you frightens me." Wade's face reddened, but he said nothing more. Emma, still swaying gently with Lily, slipped away from the fire and climbed the narrow staircase toward the second floor, needing distance from the shouting, needing air. She pushed open the door of a small upstairs room and crossed to the window, pressing her palm against the cold glass. Lightning split the sky, and for one bright second the flooded fields below lit up silver. Downstream, tangled against a stand of bent trees, she saw it. The crumpled shape of her car, half submerged, one corner of the trunk still rising above the churning water. Emma came back down the stairs so fast she nearly slipped on the last step. "It's out there," she said, breathless. "The car. I saw it in the lightning. It's caught against the trees by the creek." Mason was already moving toward her. "How far?" "Past the fence line. Maybe 200 feet from the barn." Emma's hands were shaking, but her voice held steady. "Mason, the diaper bag was on the floor of the back seat. If it's still in the car, Lily's medication could be inside it. And the metal box was in the trunk. My dad's box." "Emma." Mason's voice was quiet but firm. "No paper is worth a life. Not yours, not mine." "I'm not asking you to save the papers," Emma said. "I'm asking you to look for her medicine, please, if there's even a chance." Mason studied her face for a long moment, then looked at Lily, whose breathing had gone shallow and quick against Emma's shoulder. He thought about the pouch that might still be clipped somewhere in that back seat, the pills that could mean the difference between Lily surviving until the helicopter came and not. "All right," he said, "but we do this careful. No shortcuts." He went to the barn without waiting for an answer, moving fast despite his throbbing shoulder. Coiled rescue rope hung from a nail near the old workbench, thick and sun-faded but strong. He grabbed a second length of rope, a heavier farm rope meant for hauling equipment, and looped it over his good shoulder. Back in the farmhouse, he tied a bowline knot around his waist, then checked it twice with his fingers before nodding to himself. He added the second rope as backup, running it through a steel ring bolted to an old support beam near the fireplace, a beam thick enough to have held up the house for 80 years. "Emma, Evelyn," Mason said, "you two anchor here. Wrap the rope around the beam, then around yourselves. If I go down, you don't let go. You understand me? You brace, and you hold." Evelyn nodded, already looping the rope around her forearm the way she must have learned decades ago from her husband. Emma took her position beside her, jaw tight, eyes fixed on Mason. Wade stood in the doorway, arms crossed, saying nothing. "Need an extra set of hands?" he asked, though his tone carried no real offer in it. "Stay where you are," Mason said. "Watch the door. That's all I need from you." Wade shrugged and leaned against the frame, watching everything with a stillness that didn't match a man who claimed to want to help. Mason tested every knot one more time, tugging hard on each line until his knuckles went white. He found a long wooden pole leaning against the porch rail, once used for clearing gutters, and took it with him. "I'll test the ground as I go," he told Emma. "If it drops off, I stop. I'm not doing anything foolish out there." Emma caught his arm before he stepped off the porch. "Thank you," she whispered. He only nodded because there wasn't time for more. The water hit him at the knees the moment he left the porch, cold enough to steal his breath. He pushed the pole ahead of him with each step, feeling for solid ground beneath the churning surface. The current tugged at his legs, stronger than he expected, dragging debris past him in the dark. Behind him, Wade slipped along the porch rail towards the beam where the backup rope was anchored. His fingers worked quickly at the knot Mason had tied, loosening it just enough that it would hold under light strain, but slip the moment real weight hit it. He straightened up fast when Evelyn glanced his way, arms crossed again like he'd never moved. Mason reached the car, the water now at his waist, the current pulling harder with every step. The trunk was jammed, warped by the crash. He pulled the pry bar from his belt, the one from his motorcycle kit, and wedged it into the seam. 1 strike, 2. On the third, the trunk groaned open. Inside, half floating, sat the metal box. Beside it, wedged against the wheel well, the diaper bag, soaked through but intact. Mason grabbed both, tucking them against his chest, and turned back toward the farmhouse. That was when the water surged. The car groaned, shifted, and tore loose from the tangled branches that had held it. The sudden movement yanked the current sideways, and Mason felt the ground vanish beneath his boots. The backup rope, weakened by Wade's hands, slipped free of the beam entirely. The main rope snapped tight around Mason's waist, jerking him hard as the flood dragged him under. "Evelyn, hold it!" Emma screamed, throwing her whole weight against the line. "Hold it! Don't let go!" The rope cut into Mason's waist like a blade of fire, but he held onto the box and the pole with everything he had left. Water closed over his head for one terrible second, roaring in his ears, and then he broke the surface again, gasping. "Pull!" Emma screamed, already wrapping the loose end of the rope twice around her forearm and then her waist. She dug her heels into the muddy floorboards near the door and threw herself backward with all her weight. Evelyn didn't hesitate. 68 years old, soaked to the bone, her joints aching from the cold, she grabbed the rope behind Emma and leaned back, too. "Brace your feet against the wall," she shouted. "Don't let your knees lock, you'll go down." Emma did as she said. The rope screamed against the steel ring bolted to the beam, but it held. Together the two women became an anchor of pure will, muscles straining, hands raw, refusing to let the flood have him. "Wade," Emma shouted over her shoulder. "Help us." Wade stood frozen in the doorway. For a moment his eyes flicked towards the rope, toward the strain on Emma's face, toward the water dragging at Mason's body. Then he looked away, out toward his tow truck parked at the edge of the yard, and did not move. Emma saw it. She saw exactly what he was and what he wasn't, and something inside her hardened into certainty. He would let a man drown rather than risk his own skin. Her suspicions about the rope, about the guilt on his face earlier, all of it clicked into place like a lock turning. But there was no time for anger now, only for pulling. Out in the water, the current tore at Mason with the strength of something alive. The diaper bag slipped from his arm, torn away by the pull of the flood, and for a sick moment he thought it was gone for good. Then the strap caught on a broken branch jutting from the submerged fence line, snagging just long enough for him to lunge for it. His fingers closed around the fabric, and he crushed it against his chest along with the metal box, tucking both beneath his injured arm even as pain shot through his shoulder like a hot wire. "I've got them," he gritted out, though no one could hear him over the storm. "I've got them." He kicked hard, using the rope as his lifeline, letting Emma and Evelyn's strength drag him back through the current. The water fought him for every foot, but slowly, painfully, the porch grew closer. His boots found the sunken edge of the yard, then the slope of the bank, and finally solid ground beneath him. That's it, keep pulling," Evelyn shouted, and with one last heave, Emma and Evelyn hauled him up onto the muddy bank, both women collapsing backward with the effort. Mason rolled onto his side, coughing up water, the box and bag still clutched against his ribs. Behind him, the wrecked car finally gave way entirely, torn loose from the last branch holding it, and disappeared into the black rush of the flood, gone in seconds. He had made it out just in time. Wade saw his chance the moment Mason hit the ground. He bolted for the tow truck, wrenching the door open and throwing himself behind the wheel. He turned the key. Nothing happened. He turned it again, cursing, slamming his palm against the dashboard. The engine wouldn't even try to turn over. Mason, still lying in the mud, managed a tired, humorless laugh. "Told you," he rasped. "No one's leaving alone." He'd pulled the ignition component hours ago, tucked safe in his jacket pocket, the moment he stopped trusting Wade's story about the county sending him. Headlights cut through the rain from the flooded road, followed by the low hum of a motor that wasn't a truck at all. A county rescue boat pushed through the water toward the edge of the property, its spotlight sweeping across the yard until it found them. Deputy Calvin Ross climbed out first, boots splashing into the shallow water, his hand instinctively going to his belt when he saw Mason on the ground, soaked and bleeding, with Wade nearby looking wild-eyed and cornered. "What happened here?" Ross demanded, his eyes narrowing on Mason's leather jacket, the patch on the sleeve. "He tried to steal a box of evidence and nearly got a man killed," Evelyn said, stepping forward before anyone else could speak, her voice sharp and certain despite her exhaustion. "He loosened the rescue rope on purpose. I saw him do it." "That man saved my daughter and me both," Emma added, pointing at Mason. "Wade Mercer is the one who needs handcuffs, not him." Ross looked between them, then down at the rope still tied around Mason's waist, frayed and strained but intact, and at the second length lying slack and useless near the beam. His jaw tightened as the picture became clear. "Cuff him," Ross said to the deputy behind him, nodding toward Wade. "And bag that rope. I want it as evidence." Behind them, paramedics were already wading up from the boat, medical bags held high above the water, moving toward the farmhouse to set up a treatment area. The rain had not stopped. The roads were still gone. But help had finally arrived. Inside the farmhouse, the paramedics had set up 2 battery lanterns on the kitchen table, casting a pale glow over the room. One knelt beside Lily, checking her pulse with careful fingers, while another wrapped a blood pressure cuff around Emma's arm. A third looked at the gash on Mason's shoulder and the rope burn circling his waist, shaking his head at what the man had put his body through. Deputy Ross set the metal box on the table. The lock had rusted, but the flood had already done half the work, and it took only a firm twist of his multi-tool to snap it open. He lifted the lid slowly, as if he already sensed the weight of what was inside. Papers, damp at the edges but still legible, filled the box. Ross lifted them out one at a time, laying them across the table like pieces of a puzzle finally coming together. Loan ledgers, page after page of names and dates, interest rates scrawled higher than anything legal. Letters, some typed and some handwritten, threats disguised as friendly reminders about payments due, copies of property claims, deeds transferred under pressure, signatures that looked shaky and forced. "These aren't just old cases," Ross muttered, flipping through several sheets. Some of these dates are from last year." He looked up, his face hard. "Widows, elderly folks on fixed incomes, single parents." He set the papers down like they had burned his hand. "Silas Mercer's dead. This is Wade's work." At the bottom of the box sat a small handheld recorder, its plastic casing scratched but intact. Ross pressed play, and Daniel Harper's voice filled the room, tired and steady, recorded years ago but somehow still full of life. "My name is Daniel Harper. If anyone is listening to this, then something has happened to me, and I need the truth told." The recording continued for several minutes, Daniel explaining the loans, the threats against Emma, the reason he left the club, and his fear that Mercer would never stop hurting families as long as no one stood against him. Ross listened without interrupting, his earlier suspicion of Mason draining slowly from his face. Beneath the recorder was a sealed envelope with Emma's name written across the front in Daniel's careful handwriting. Emma's hands trembled as she picked it up. She looked at Mason, who nodded once, silently telling her it was safe to open. She broke the seal and unfolded the letter, her voice shaking as she began to read aloud. "Emma, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. I let you believe the worst thing I could have let you believe, and I did it because I thought anger would hurt you less than fear. The club never abandoned me. I left because Mercer threatened to use you against me, and I could not let that happen. I told you never to trust a man wearing that patch because I needed you far away from anything connected to me. It was a lie born out of love, but it was still a lie, and you deserved better." Emma's voice broke. She pressed a hand to her mouth for a moment before continuing. "Mason Cole is the finest and most loyal man I have ever known. If you are with him now, know that I trusted him with the only thing that ever mattered to me, which was you. Don't inherit my pride, Emma. Don't let it cost you the way it cost me. Accepting honest help is not weakness. It never was. I was too proud to ask, and I paid for that pride with years I could have spent watching you grow. Don't make my mistake. Let people love you. Let him love you. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry. Love, Dad." The letter fell from Emma's fingers onto the table. She pressed both hands over her face and wept, her shoulders shaking with sobs that had been buried for years, grief for a father she had only now begun to understand. Mason didn't speak. He didn't try to comfort her with words or pull her away from the pain. He simply sat beside her on the bench, close enough that she could feel he was there, and let her grieve. After a long moment, Emma reached over and took his hand, gripping it tightly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I accused you. I blamed you for something you never did." Mason shook his head slowly. "You loved him with the only truth you had," he said quietly. "That's not something you need forgiveness for." Beside them, on the table where the paramedics had laid her, Lily stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and her small hand lifted, reaching toward Emma and Mason both. The gray light of dawn crept through the cracked farmhouse windows, thin and watery, but it was light all the same. Outside, the rain had softened from a roar to a whisper, tapping gently on the roof instead of hammering it. The wind had died down too. For the first time in hours, the world outside did not sound like it was trying to tear itself apart. Inside, the paramedics moved with steadier hands now that the worst of the storm had passed. One pressed a gauze pad against the cut on Emma's temple, checking her pupils with a small pen light and asking her simple questions to make sure her mind was clear. "What's your daughter's name?" the paramedic asked. "Lily," Emma said, her voice still rough from crying. "Lily Harper." "Good. What day is it?" Emma managed a tired half-smile. "Honestly, I've lost track, but I know my daughter's name and I know his," she said, glancing at Mason. "That's enough for me right now." The paramedic nodded, satisfied, and began wrapping a fresh bandage around her head. Across the table, another paramedic worked on Mason's shoulder, cleaning the gash and easing it into a sling. Mason winced but said nothing, his eyes fixed on Lily, who lay wrapped in warm blankets near the fire, her small chest rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm. Color had returned to her cheeks. Her lips, once pale and blue, had turned a soft pink again. Deputy Ross walked over, his boots heavy against the old wooden floor. He looked tired, but there was something different in his face now, something softer than the suspicion he'd carried when he first arrived. "Wade's secured," he said. "He's not going anywhere. My guys are keeping him in the truck until we can get him to the county jail." He paused, glancing at the papers still spread across the table. "And thanks to what's in that box, he's not walking away from this easy." Emma nodded, wiping her eyes. "Helicopters fueled and ready," Ross continued. "Pilot says the second the fog lifts enough for a safe landing, they'll be here. Could be 20 minutes, could be less." Evelyn, standing near the fireplace with a blanket around her own shoulders, let out a long breath of relief. "Thank the Lord," she whispered. Emma looked down at Lily, then over at Mason, who sat quietly with his uninjured hand resting near the baby's blanket, as if he couldn't bear to be far from her now. "Mason," Emma said softly. He looked up. "When she's older," Emma said, "I want you to tell her about my dad. Real stories. Not the version I grew up believing. The truth, who he really was, who you both were together." Mason's throat tightened. He looked down at Lily's small face, so peaceful now, so far from the terror of just a few hours ago. "I can do that," he said quietly. "I'd be honored to." Emma reached over and squeezed his hand, and for a moment the farmhouse felt warm, despite the cold air still leaking through the broken windows. It felt, for just a moment, like something whole was being built out of everything the storm had tried to destroy. Then the radio on the paramedic's belt crackled. "Copter's 3 minutes out. Prep for transport." Emma let out a breath of relief. "Did you hear that, baby girl?" she whispered, leaning over Lily. "We're almost—" She stopped. Lily's small chest, which had been rising and falling in that steady rhythm, suddenly hitched. Her tiny fingers, curled loosely at her side, twitched once, then went still. "Something's wrong," Emma said, her voice sharp with panic. "Something's wrong. Her heart. She has a condition, a heart defect. She can't—" The paramedic nearest Lily leaned in fast, pressing 2 fingers to her wrist, his brow furrowing. "Pulse is irregular. Very irregular." "She has a congenital defect," Emma said, her words tumbling out too fast, her hands shaking as she gripped the edge of the table. "There's a specific protocol, a specific medication, but I can't remember the exact dosage. It's on her card. It's in her bag." The paramedic reached for the diaper bag Mason had pulled from the wrecked car, unzipping it in one quick motion. His face fell. The bag was torn along one seam, soaked through, and empty. "Try the hospital," Ross said quickly, already reaching for his radio. "Get her records pulled up." The paramedic tried the channel. Static. He tried again. Nothing but a dead hiss. "Signal's down again," he said. "Storm knocked something loose." Another paramedic began preparing a syringe, his hands moving fast out of instinct. "I'm going with the standard cardiac protocol," he said. "It's the safest bet without records." "No!" Emma's voice cracked like a whip. "You can't. That medication could stop her heart completely. Her condition is rare. It reacts differently. Please, you have to wait." Lily's small body went limp against the blankets. Her eyes, half open a moment before, slid closed. Mason felt the floor tilt beneath him. He had seen this before. A hospital hallway, a doctor's face, a small, still form that would never move again. He stared at Lily, unmoving, unbreathing, and for one terrible heartbeat, the farmhouse disappeared entirely, replaced by a memory 20 years old and just as sharp as the night it happened. "Get the mask on her," the paramedic shouted, already moving. His partner slipped a small oxygen mask over Lily's face, while the first began gentle compressions with 2 fingers, careful and precise against her tiny chest. "Come on," Emma whispered, gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. "Come on, baby, please." The paramedic working the mask looked up sharply. "Any medical ID on her? A bracelet, a card, anything with her diagnosis written down? We need specifics before we give her anything else." Emma's mind raced backward, fighting through fear and exhaustion to find the memory. Her hands went to her own chest, as if she could pull the answer out of the air. "The pouch," she said suddenly. "There's a pouch, waterproof. I clipped it inside her snowsuit before we left the house. It has everything, her diagnosis, her cardiologist's number, the medication she can't have. I always clip it in the same spot, right by the zipper." "Where is it now?" the paramedic asked. Emma looked down at Lily, and her stomach dropped. The outer layer of the snowsuit was torn wide open along one side, the fabric shredded and hanging loose where it had caught on something during the crash. "It could be anywhere," Emma said, her voice breaking. "The car, the ditch, the sled, anywhere between here and there." Mason was already moving. He dropped to his knees beside the pile of soaked blankets near the fireplace, ignoring the sharp stab of pain that shot through his injured shoulder. He shook out each blanket, checking every fold, every crease, before tossing it aside and reaching for the next. Nothing. He crawled towards the broken section of shelter roof they had used as a rescue sled, running his hands along every splintered board, every strap. His fingers searched the muddy grooves in the wood, feeling for anything small and hard. Still nothing. "Check the floor," Evelyn said, already dropping to her knees near the doorway, her old joints protesting but her hands moving fast, sweeping across the wet floorboards where they had first laid Emma down. Mason moved to the pile of muddy clothing near the door. Emma's ruined coat, his own torn shirt, anything that had touched the water. He patted down each piece, searched every pocket, and came up empty every time. His heart pounded harder with each passing second. Behind him, the paramedic's voice grew more urgent. "Pulse is weakening. We're running out of time to guess right." Mason's hands were shaking now, not from the cold, but from something deeper, something that clawed up from 20 years in the past. He remembered standing in a hospital hallway just like this, helpless, watching doctors try to save someone he loved while he could do nothing but wait. He would not wait this time. He would not just wait. "Was she wrapped in anything?" the paramedic asked suddenly, looking up from Lily's still form. "Right after the crash? Before the blankets? Anything at all?" Mason froze. His eyes dropped to his own leather jacket, still lying where he had placed it after finally setting Lily down near the fire hours ago. It had stayed close to her the entire night, draped over the arm of the old chair, within reach in case she grew cold again. He grabbed it and turned it over in his hands, his fingers moving fast despite the pain screaming through his shoulder. He checked the outer pockets first. Empty. He checked the collar, the cuffs, the torn seam along one sleeve. Nothing. Then he remembered the deep inner lining, the hidden pocket sewn close to his heart where he kept Noah's memorial pin, the one place on the jacket he never let anyone else touch. His hands trembled as he reached inside. His fingers brushed against the cool metal of the pin first, and right beside it, wedged deep into the lining, something small and rectangular. Waterproof. Solid. He pulled it out. The pouch. "Here!" Mason's voice cracked as he shouted it across the room, already moving toward the paramedics, holding the pouch out with his uninjured hand. "It's here. It must have slipped out of her snowsuit when I carried her against my chest." The paramedic tore it open in one quick motion, scanning the laminated card inside. His eyes moved fast, reading the words that had been written in careful, deliberate handwriting. Hypoplastic left heart, corrective surgery at 6 months, severe reaction to standard cardiac medications, contact Dr. Reyes immediately, emergency dosage listed below. "That's it," the paramedic said, already reaching for a different vial. "That's what we needed. Changing protocol now." He worked fast, adjusting the dosage exactly as the card described, his movements sure and confident now that guesswork had been replaced with certainty. Emma stood frozen, watching, barely daring to breathe. Long seconds passed. Then more. Lily's small chest rose. Then it rose again, steadier this time. The paramedic monitoring her pulse let out a breath of relief. "Rhythm's stabilizing," he said. "She's coming back." Emma's knees nearly buckled. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself, tears streaming down her face as she watched Lily's cheeks slowly regain their color. She turned to look at Mason, who stood frozen with the empty pouch still in his hand, his jacket hanging forgotten over his good arm. "Your jacket," Emma whispered, understanding rushing through her all at once. It saved her twice. The rain had finally moved on, leaving only a fine mist behind it, when the sound of rotor blades cut through the gray morning sky. Mason heard it first, that steady beat growing louder over the trees, and felt something in his chest loosen for the first time in hours. "That's them," he said, already moving towards the door, careful to keep his injured arm close to his body. Evelyn helped Emma gather Lily, now wrapped in a dry blanket, her small face still pale but her breathing steady. The paramedics carried her out ahead of them, moving fast across the muddy field toward the helicopter that had landed in the flattened grass beyond the farmhouse. The noise was tremendous, wind whipping outward from the blades. But Mason barely noticed. His eyes stayed fixed on Lily the entire way. One of the paramedics turned to Emma as they reached the aircraft, shouting to be heard over the engine. "We've got room for one more passenger unless there's a serious injury that needs immediate transport. Otherwise, ground crews will follow behind." Emma's eyes went straight to Mason. "His shoulder," she said. "He fell from the roof last night. It's not just bruised, something's wrong with it." "I'm fine," Mason said quickly. "Take her. That's all that matters." "No." Emma's voice cracked, but she did not back down. "I'm not getting on that helicopter unless I know you're getting looked at too." Deputy Ross appeared then, stepping out from behind the rescue truck that had finally made it up the ruined road. He had heard the exchange, and something in his face had changed since the night before. The suspicion that colored his features when he first arrived was gone, replaced by something closer to respect. "Get him on," Ross said to the paramedic, nodding toward Mason. "That shoulder could be fractured, and besides," he added, looking directly at Mason for the first time without any trace of doubt, "that little girl trusts him. Seems like she needs him close as much as she needs the machines." Mason opened his mouth to argue, but Ross cut him off. "You crossed a flood and pulled a child through a storm all night. Get on the helicopter, Cole. That's an order, not a request." There was no more time to argue. The paramedics guided Mason up into the aircraft beside Emma, strapping his arm into a temporary sling before takeoff. Lily was secured in a small transport carrier between them, her tiny oxygen mask fogging gently with each breath. The helicopter lifted off the ground, tilting slightly before leveling out over the flooded fields below. Emma held the oxygen mask steady over Lily's face, watching the rise and fall of her daughter's chest with an intensity that blocked out everything else in the world. Mason sat beside them, his arm immobilized against his side, unable to do much more than watch. But then he felt it, a small movement against his hand. Lily's fingers, weak but certain, curled around his own. He looked down, and something in his throat tightened. He did not pull away. Emma noticed, too. Over the roar of the engine, she leaned closer so he could hear her. "You've done more than my father ever could have asked of you," she said. "More than anyone could ask." Mason shook his head slowly, his eyes never leaving Lily's small hand wrapped around his fingers. "We're not safe yet," he said. "Not until she's stable. Not until we know." The flight continued as the sun began to break through the clouds, streaks of gold spilling over the flooded landscape below. By the time Briar Glen Regional Hospital came into view, the storm had passed completely, leaving only puddles and broken branches scattered across the ground. The helicopter landed hard on the hospital pad, and the doors flew open before the blades had even slowed. A team of doctors and nurses rushed forward, moving with practiced urgency. "Cardiac emergency, possible hypoplastic complication," one paramedic called out, and hands reached in to lift Lily from her carrier. "Get the mother in for imaging, head trauma, possible concussion," another voice added, and Emma was pulled gently but firmly toward a separate gurney. "Sir, this way," someone said to Mason, guiding him toward the emergency department entrance. Mason twisted back, trying to catch one last glimpse of Lily as the doors began to close between them. "Wait," he said, his voice raw. "I need to know if she's okay." But the doors sealed shut, and Lily disappeared from view. The emergency room was bright and cold, full of the sharp smell of antiseptic. A nurse guided Mason to a curtained bay and told him to sit still while she checked his shoulder. He barely felt her hands moving over him. His eyes kept drifting to the doorway, waiting for someone to tell him something about Lily. "Dislocated," the nurse said, pressing gently near his collarbone. "And there's a small fracture here, too. We'll need to set the shoulder, but it shouldn't require surgery. I'm going to get you something for the pain before we do this." "Not yet," Mason said. She looked up at him, surprised. "Sir, this is going to hurt a lot worse if we wait." "I don't care." His voice was steady, but his eyes were not. "I need to know about the baby first. Lily Harper. She came in on the same helicopter. Please, find out how she's doing before you give me anything." The nurse studied him for a moment, then nodded and stepped out. Mason sat alone on the hospital bed, his shoulder throbbing, his shirt still damp from the storm. He thought about Lily's small hand curled around his finger on the helicopter. He thought about Noah, and how a hospital hallway just like this one had once taken everything from him. He pressed his eyes shut and waited. Down the hall, a doctor was already speaking with Emma. Her head had been cleared of any bleeding, only a concussion, the doctor said, and she would need rest and observation. But Emma was not thinking about herself. She kept asking about her daughter until a pediatric cardiologist finally arrived, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes and a clipboard in her hand. "Mrs. Harper, I want to explain what we found," the doctor said gently. "The stress of last night made things worse. Lily's heart condition has progressed. The pressure inside her heart is higher than it should be, and if we wait, it could become life-threatening." Emma's hands trembled. "What does that mean?" "It means she needs surgery today, this afternoon, if possible. It's the same procedure we've discussed before, just happening sooner than planned. I won't lie to you, it's serious. But waiting is more dangerous than acting now." Emma nodded, tears slipping down her face as the doctor placed a stack of papers in front of her. Her hand shook as she signed each line, her signature growing smaller and less steady with every page. When the doctor left, Emma sat alone for a moment, gathering herself. Then she stepped out into the hallway and saw Mason standing near the elevator, his arm now in a sling, a jacket draped over his good shoulder. He looked like a man preparing to leave. "Where are you going?" she asked. Mason turned, his face tired and unsure. "I did what I needed to do," he said quietly. "She's here now. She's safe. My part in this is finished." Emma shook her head, stepping closer. "No, it's not." "Emma, every time she opened her eyes last night, she looked for you," Emma said, her voice breaking. "Not me first. You. She reached for your voice before mine. Don't you dare walk away now." Before Mason could answer, the elevator doors opened, and a group of men in leather vests stepped out, filling the hallway with the smell of rain and motor oil. Roy Dawson led them, carrying a duffel bag of dry clothes. Behind him, others carried warm food, blankets, and an envelope thick with cash. "We heard," Roy said simply, handing Mason the bag. "Brought you something dry to wear." One of the younger members stepped forward and placed something small in Mason's palm. It was Noah's memorial pin, cleaned and repaired, the metal gleaming again. "Paramedic found it in your jacket lining," he said. "Didn't want you to lose it." Mason's fingers closed around the pin, his throat tight. Nurses and hospital staff who had been watching from a distance exchanged glances, their earlier wariness fading into something softer. Deputy Ross, standing near the nurses' station, watched the men quietly hand Emma the envelope of money without asking for anything in return. Emma looked at Mason, her eyes pleading. "Stay until it's over," she said. "Please, just until we know she's okay." Mason looked down at the pin in his hand, then at Emma's face. Fear moved through him, old and familiar, the fear of loving a child he might lose all over again. "Okay," he said finally, his voice rough. "I'll stay." The waiting room on the third floor had gray chairs bolted in rows, and a television bolted to the wall with the sound turned off. Nobody watched it. Emma sat with her hands folded so tight her knuckles had gone white, and Mason sat beside her, his arm in its sling, Noah's pin tucked safe in his shirt pocket where he could feel it against his chest. Roy and the others had taken up the far corner of the room, quiet as men in church, though a few nurses still glanced at their leather vests like they expected trouble. Trouble did not come. Just coffee, passed hand to hand, and low voices asking Emma if she needed anything. A little after 10, the doors at the end of the hall opened and a county car pulled up outside. Evelyn came in slowly, her coat still damp, an officer walking beside her carrying a folder. "They kept me most of the morning," she said, easing into a chair with a tired sigh. "Had to tell them everything about Wade, every last detail. I don't think that boy will see daylight again for a long while." She reached over and patted Emma's knee. "How is she?" "In surgery," Emma whispered. "They said it could take hours." Evelyn nodded and folded her hands in her lap, and for a while nobody said anything at all. The clock on the wall ticked loud enough to hear. It was Emma who finally broke the silence, her voice low, like she needed to say it before she lost her nerve. "Lily's father left before she was born," she said, staring at the floor. "Soon as the doctors told us about her heart, he was gone within a week. Couldn't handle what was coming. The appointments, the not knowing, all of it." She swallowed hard. "I don't blame him anymore. Not really. But I promised myself I'd never again let a man walk into her life and only give her the parts that were easy." Mason sat very still, listening. "That's why I got so angry at you," Emma went on. "Not because of what you told me about my dad, because I was scared you'd be the same. Show up when it's exciting, then disappear when it gets hard." Mason looked down at his hands, worn and scarred, and for a long moment he didn't answer. When he did, his voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. "Your father asked me to watch over you from a distance," he said, "and for years I told myself that was enough. that doing good from far away was safer for everybody, safer for me most of all. He glanced up at her. Truth is, I used his promise as a shield. Long as I kept my distance, I never had to risk loving somebody I might lose again. It wasn't really about protecting you, Emma. It was about protecting myself. Emma didn't say anything, just reached over and took his hand, careful of the sling, and held it while the clock kept ticking and the hours crawled by. It was well past 2 in the afternoon when the surgeon finally came through the double doors, still in her scrubs, her mask pulled down around her neck. Everyone stood at once. "She did well," the surgeon said, and the whole room seemed to breathe again. "Better than well, actually. The repair went exactly as we hoped. And whatever information was in that medical card you found," she said, looking at Mason, "it made all the difference. Because we had the right dosage before surgery, we prevented damage to her kidneys and liver that could have complicated everything. She's a very lucky little girl." "She's going to be okay?" Emma asked, barely able to get the words out. "She'll spend tonight in intensive care, just to be safe. But yes, I expect a full recovery." Emma broke into tears, and Mason pulled her into his good arm without thinking, and for the first time since the storm, he let himself cry too. He cried for Lily, and for Noah, and for Claire, and for Daniel, all the losses and near losses tangled together until he could no longer tell which tears belonged to which name. Later, when the room had quieted and Roy had taken the others down for coffee, Emma looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen. "I don't want you watching from a distance anymore," she said. "No more secret money, no more disappearing after the danger's over. I want you there, really there. Birthdays, doctor visits, all of it." Mason wiped his face and shook his head slowly. "I don't know what that looks like yet, Emma. I don't know what I'd even be to her." "You don't have to know yet," Emma said. "Just don't leave." Mason looked toward the doors where Lily lay sleeping. "I'll be here," he said. "When she wakes up, I'll be here." The morning light came in gray through the tall windows, soft with leftover rain. Emma had drifted off in the chair beside Lily's bed sometime after 4, her head resting against the cushioned rail, and a nurse had covered her shoulders with a warm blanket without waking her. Mason had stayed in the family waiting room through the night, sitting between Roy and Evelyn, none of them saying much. Roy dozed off around 3. Evelyn stayed awake with Mason, her hands folded over her purse, humming softly under her breath every so often, an old hymn Mason didn't know but found himself listening for anyway. At 7:30, a young nurse with tired eyes and a kind face stepped into the waiting room. "Mr. Cole," she said, "Lily's awake. Mrs. Harper is still asleep, but the little one keeps looking at the door. You're welcome to come sit with her if you'd like." Mason stood so fast his shoulder ached under the sling, but he barely noticed. The intensive care room was small and quiet, filled with the soft beeping of monitors and the hush of machines doing their careful work. Lily lay in a crib bed too big for her, wires taped gently to her chest, a bandage peeking from beneath her hospital gown. Her eyes were half open, heavy with sleep and medicine, but when Mason stepped close, she turned her head toward him. "Hey there," he whispered, his voice rough. "Hey, sweet girl." Lily made a small sound, not quite a cry, more like a question. Then her hand lifted, small and trembling, and reached for his face. Her fingers found his beard and closed around it, tugging weakly. Mason laughed despite himself, a sound thick with emotion. "Yeah," he said softly. "It's me." Lily's mouth curved into a smile, slow and sleepy but real. Her eyes stayed on his face like she was making sure of something. Emma stirred in her chair, blinking awake, and when she saw them together, tears welled up fast in her eyes. "Look at that," she whispered. "She knows her Papa Mace." Mason glanced over at her, startled. "Her what?" "Papa Mace," Emma said, wiping her eyes and smiling for the first time in what felt like days. "Feels right, doesn't it?" Lily, still holding his beard, made a small babbling sound. She said, then tried again. "Mix." Mason's throat tightened so hard he couldn't speak for a moment. He just nodded and let the baby keep her small fist wrapped in his beard, and did not pull away. Over the next 3 days, Lily grew stronger by the hour. She was moved out of intensive care into a regular room, with a window that looked over the hospital's small courtyard garden, and the monitors came off one by one until only a single wire remained, tracking her heartbeat on a screen that no longer worried anyone in the room. Emma's headaches faded, her balance steadied, and the doctor cleared her concussion with only a note to rest and avoid driving for another week. Mason learned, carefully and patiently, how to hold Lily without disturbing the bandage taped along her side, cradling her weight against his good arm, while Emma showed him where not to press. He got better at it each day, until the nurses stopped hovering when he lifted her. On the third afternoon, Deputy Ross came by, hat in hand, looking uncertain in a way Mason had never seen from him before. "Wanted to say I was wrong about you," Ross said, meeting Mason's eyes. "Judged you by that patch before I knew a thing about you. Won't happen again." He turned to Emma. "Wade's been charged. Sabotage, coercion, plus what they found tied to his father's records. He won't be bothering anybody for a long while." Emma thanked him, and Ross nodded once, uncomfortable with the gratitude, and left. On the fourth afternoon, the doctors discharged Lily with a folder of instructions and a follow-up appointment scheduled for 2 weeks out. Since Emma still couldn't drive, Mason borrowed Roy's truck and drove them home himself, Lily secured in a new car seat in the back, Emma quiet and watchful beside him. At the apartment door, Emma unlocked it, then turned back before Mason could say his goodbyes and disappear the way he always used to. "Come in," she said. "Stay for dinner." Mason hesitated only a moment before he stepped inside. 6 weeks passed the way good weeks do, quietly, one after another, hardly noticed until you looked back and saw how far the road had gone. Emma went back to work 3 days a week at the nursing home, easing into her shifts slowly, while Evelyn watched Lily in the mornings. Lily grew rounder in the cheeks, steadier on her feet, her scar fading to a thin pink line she liked to point at and say, "Boo-boo," while Mason nodded solemnly like it was the most important scar in the world. Mason came by most evenings. He knew now which drawer held the little medicine cups, how many milliliters went into them, and what time Lily needed her dose so she wouldn't fuss through the night. He fixed the wobbly leg on Emma's kitchen table, replaced a cracked cabinet hinge, and rehung a bedroom door that had stuck since before Emma moved in. He never made a show of it. He just noticed what was broken and made it not broken anymore. At Lily's 2-week follow-up, then her 4-week follow-up, Mason sat in the waiting room chair beside Emma, filling out nothing, saying little, but present every single time. The cardiologist began addressing questions to both of them without thinking twice about it. Meanwhile, the papers from Daniel's metal box moved through the county courthouse, like sunlight through a cracked window. Slow at first, then all at once. Investigators working with Deputy Ross traced ledger entries to 43 different families the Mercers had targeted over 11 years. Elderly homeowners, single parents, a widow who had nearly lost her house over a debt that had already been paid twice. Wade Mercer, facing the weight of what his father had built and what he himself had continued, agreed to testify against 2 associates who had helped hide the family's assets. In exchange, his lawyer negotiated for leniency. Emma felt no comfort in that arrangement, and no anger either. She had Lily. That was enough to spend her anger on something else. One by one, fraudulent liens began to lift. A county clerk called an 81-year-old man named Otis Fry to tell him his home, which he thought he might lose within the year, was his again, free and clear. Then the county announced a ceremony, and Mason wanted no part of it. "I don't do stages," he told Roy in the clubhouse garage, wiping grease off a wrench he didn't need to clean. "Nobody does," Roy said. "Doesn't mean you skip it." The community hall was packed that Saturday evening, folding chairs lined in rows, a banner strung across the back wall that read, "County of Washburn honors our storm heroes." Evelyn sat near the front in her good blue dress, hands folded the way she had folded them all through that long night in the farmhouse. Rescue crews stood in their pressed uniforms. 6 members of Mason's chapter sat together near the aisle, looking stiff and out of place in a room with folding tablecloths and lemonade in paper cups. Deputy Ross stood at the podium first. He cleared his throat twice before he spoke. "I want to say something plain," he said. "I looked at a man in a leather jacket and decided who he was before he said a word. That's on me. My prejudice nearly cost me the truth, and it nearly cost this county the chance to thank the person who saved a baby's life. I was wrong. I'm saying so in front of all of you." Emma spoke next, Daniel's letter trembling slightly in her hands. "My father wrote this to me before he died," she said. "He said family is not the people who are easiest to keep around. Family is whoever remains when leaving would be simpler." She looked up, found Mason's eyes across the room. He remained. He just did it from a distance, so I'd never see it. When they called Mason up, he stood like a man walking toward a dentist's chair. He kept it short. "Lily didn't care what patch I wore," he said, voice low and rough. "She just needed to be warm. That's all any of us really need from each other when you get down to it." He sat back down fast, ears red, while the room applauded anyway. Afterward, an old woman with a cane found him by the lemonade table. "Mercer took my late husband's shop," she said. "Your club helped me file the paperwork to get it back. I never knew your names. Thank you." Others came, one after another, thanking Daniel's memory, thanking the patch Mason wore. The county commissioner rose again near the end, announcing that seized Mercer funds would fund a new family emergency center. Evelyn stood from her chair. "I know just the place," she said. "There's an old farmhouse that could use some new life in it." The first 2 months of work on the farmhouse were the hardest. Volunteers showed up on Saturday mornings with tool belts and thermoses of coffee, climbing onto the old roof to tear away rotted shingles and lay down new ones. Mason was up there most days, sweat soaking through his shirt, nails held between his teeth while he worked. The foundation needed shoring up too, cracked in 3 places from years of neglect. A crew of retired contractors from town donated their time, pouring new concrete and reinforcing the beams underneath the old farmhouse floor. Lily came sometimes. Bundled in a stroller, Evelyn pushed along the gravel drive, watching the men work with wide, curious eyes. She learned the word hammer before she learned the word please, which made Emma laugh every time Lily pointed at Mason and said it like a command. Winter came hard that year, the way it always did in Washburn County, but the club showed up anyway. Roy brought in 2 industrial heaters donated by a supply company that owed him a favor from years back. Earl, still tethered to his oxygen tank but too stubborn to sit still, supervised the installation of a backup generator system big enough to keep the whole building running through a blackout. Mason spent whole weekends under the floorboards, running wire and testing circuits, his breath fogging in the cold. Emma had her own project. She sat down with a legal pad one evening at her kitchen table, Lily asleep in the next room, and sketched out what she called the waiting room. a space for parents of medically fragile children to sit together during long hospital transfers or hard nights. Soft chairs, a coffee station, a corkboard where families could pin photos of their kids, the ones who made it and the ones who didn't. She showed the sketch to Mason, and he studied it a long moment before nodding. "Build it exactly like that," he said. "Don't let anybody talk you into something fancier. Fancy isn't what people need at 3 a.m. Spring brought new energy to the property. Deputy Ross started teaching storm preparedness classes in the barn, now cleared out and fitted with folding chairs and a whiteboard. He taught families how to read emergency radio bands, how to pack a go bag, how to know when floodwater was rising too fast to wait. Evelyn recruited volunteers from every corner of the county, retired teachers who ran tutoring sessions for displaced kids, retired nurses who offered basic first aid classes, veterans who helped rebuild the barn's old stalls into storage rooms for donated supplies. Through it all, Mason kept showing up, not just to the farmhouse, but to Emma's apartment, to Lily's life. He learned the rhythm of bath time, the right way to hold the spoon so Lily wouldn't fling her peas across the room, the specific stuffed rabbit that had to be tucked under her arm before she'd sleep. He never asked for a title. He just kept appearing, weekend after weekend, evening after evening, until his presence stopped feeling like a visit and started feeling like something else entirely. 2 weeks before the anniversary of the storm, the county gathered at the farmhouse for its official dedication. A new sign hung above the porch, freshly painted. The Daniel Harper Family Relief Center. Emma cried when she saw it, her hand pressed against her mouth, Lily balanced on her hip. After the small crowd thinned out and the sun started dipping low over the fields, Emma found Mason near his motorcycle, parked at the edge of the gravel lot. She was holding something folded over her arm. "This is yours," she said, handing him the leather jacket. It had been cleaned, the scuffs mended, the leather conditioned until it looked almost new again. Mason opened it and found Noah's memorial pin still resting inside, right where it had always been. Beside it now sat a small silver lily, stitched carefully into the lining. "Emma," he started, but she shook her head. "I don't want you telling people you're a family friend anymore," she said. "I want you at birthdays, holidays, ordinary Tuesday dinners. I want you sitting next to me in that cardiologist's office for as long as she needs one." Mason's jaw tightened. "I don't know how to be somebody's father or grandfather, whatever this is. I've been alone a long time, Emma." "Family isn't a prize you win for being perfect," Emma said, her voice steady. "It's a promise to stay. That's all it's ever been." Mason knelt down beside the stroller where Lily sat watching him, her small hands reaching for his beard the way they always did. "Papa Mace," she said. Mason closed his eyes for just a moment, then opened them and nodded. "Yeah, baby girl," he said. "Papa Mace." The morning of the anniversary came clear and cool, the kind of sky that made it hard to believe a storm had ever torn through this place. Mason arrived before the sun fully cleared the tree line, his truck bouncing up the gravel drive with the same generator parts he'd hauled 100 times before. He wanted to check everything twice. 3 times, if it came to that. The shed still smelled like motor oil and old wood, but the generator itself gleamed now, cleaned and cared for the way a man cares for something that once saved a life. Mason crouched beside it, running his hand along the fuel line he'd replaced a year ago, checking the connections out of habit more than necessity. It started on the first pull, the low hum settling into his chest like a heartbeat. "Still babying that thing?" Earl said from the doorway, oxygen tank rolling behind him. "Some things earn a little babying," Mason said. By 8 o'clock, cars filled the gravel lot. Evelyn moved through the crowd with a clipboard, directing volunteers to their stations with the same crisp authority she must have used decades ago in a classroom. She sent teenagers to set up folding tables, retired nurses to the first aid corner, and 2 shy new volunteers to the donation table, walking them through it patiently until they nodded with confidence. Deputy Ross had the barn doors thrown wide open. A small crowd of families gathered around a table where he demonstrated how to read a weather radio, how to pack an emergency bag, how to recognize the sound floodwater made before it became dangerous. He caught Mason's eye across the yard and gave him a short nod, the kind of nod that carried a year's worth of changed opinion in it. Roy and 4 other members of the chapter pulled in around 9, saddlebags loaded with canned goods, bottled water, blankets, and boxes of supplies the club had been collecting for weeks. They unloaded without being asked, stacking crates in the storage room Evelyn had cleared out, joking with volunteers who no longer flinched at their leather vests and patches. Emma stood near the front porch most of the morning, greeting families as they walked up the steps, Lily balanced on her hip in a little sundress, with a lily pin clipped near the collar. She thanked each person for coming, explained what the center offered, and pointed them toward whichever volunteer could help with whatever they needed. Near the entrance hung the framed photograph, the one Roy had dug out of an old shoebox. Daniel stood grinning beside Mason and 3 other brothers, all of them younger, all of them unaware of what the years would bring. Beneath it, painted in careful letters, were Daniel's own words. "Family is the one who stays when leaving would be easier." Mason paused in front of it more than once that day, hands in his pockets, saying nothing. By evening, the crowd had thinned to the people who mattered most. Folding chairs sat scattered across the porch and yard, paper plates with half-eaten cake resting on laps. The sky had turned the color of a bruise, clouds rolling in slow from the west, and thunder rumbled somewhere far off, low and distant. Emma found Mason near the porch steps, Lily drowsy against her shoulder, rubbing her eyes the way she always did when sleep was close. "Storms still bother you?" Emma asked, watching him glance toward the horizon. Mason was quiet a moment. "Yeah," he admitted. "They do. What scares you about them now?" He looked at her, then at Lily, then at Evelyn laughing with Ross near the barn, at Roy and Earl loading empty crates back into the truck, at all the families still lingering in the golden porch light. "Not what they might take," he said. "What might happen to the people waiting for me at home if I wasn't there?" Lily stirred, reaching one small hand toward him, fingers opening and closing the way they used to when she was barely more than a baby. Mason lifted her gently from Emma's arms and settled her against his chest. She wasn't cold. She wasn't in any danger. But he shrugged out of his jacket anyway and wrapped it around her small shoulders, because she liked the weight of it, the smell of leather and rain that had never quite washed out. Emma slipped her hand into his. Mason stood there on the porch, thunder rolling low in the distance, Lily's breathing slowing into sleep against him. He thought of Noah. He thought of Claire. He thought of Daniel, and the promise he had never stopped keeping. Loving them hadn't replaced anyone he'd lost. It had simply given all that love somewhere new to live. He had believed, once, that the storm led him to a child who needed saving. Standing there now, Emma's hand in his, Lily asleep against his chest, he understood it had led him home. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story, and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.